Imagine waking up every morning feeling trapped in your own life. Every day a repeat of broken promises to yourself. This was William's reality, a 30-year-old man who could not stick with a job, a project, or even a simple goal for more than a few weeks. He tried motivation, willpower, and grand plans, yet every attempt ended the same. Disappointment, frustration, and a sense that something inside him was fundamentally flawed. But then, William discovered a system that would completely change his life. It was not about pushing harder, doing more, or waiting for motivation to strike. Instead, it was about building tiny, unbreakable habits and cultivating the inner strength to continue even when everything felt uncomfortable. The Japanese concepts of Shitsuke, creating simple systems that make success almost automatic, and Gaman, the ability to endure discomfort without giving up, became the foundation of his transformation. In this story, you will follow William from the lowest point of his life, with just $847 in his account and no clear direction, to someone who builds a thriving business, develops unshakable discipline, and redefines his identity. You will see how starting ridiculously small 5 emails a day, running just 400 meters, can compound into life-changing results. This is not a tale of overnight success or magical shortcuts. It is a story about consistency, resilience, and the power of tiny actions repeated relentlessly. If you have ever struggled to stay consistent, if you have ever felt that motivation is not enough, this story will show you a new path, one that turns ordinary effort into extraordinary results. Before we dive in, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, so you won't miss the practical strategies and inspiring lessons that can help you transform your own life. Stick around, you won't to miss a single step of William's journey. After realizing that motivation alone had failed him countless times, William understood that the key to real transformation was not in grand gestures or sudden bursts of willpower, but in starting so small that failure became almost impossible. He reflected on all the times he had tried to overhaul his life, whether it was training for a marathon, launching a business, or sticking to a new routine, only to crumble under the weight of ambition and self-doubt. That night, sitting in his modest apartment, he decided to take an entirely different approach, one that embraced simplicity and repetition over intensity and perfection. William's first step was almost laughably small. Instead of attempting to secure major clients or draft a complicated business plan, he committed to sending just 5 emails a day to potential clients. The task was deliberately modest, something he could complete even on the days when his energy was low and his mind wanted to resist. At the same time, he tackled his physical health with the same principle. Not a marathon, not even a 5-run, but a mere 400 meters around his block each morning. To anyone else, these actions might have seemed trivial, even pointless. But for William, they were revolutionary. By setting the bar so low, he removed the mental excuses that had always sabotaged him, creating a foundation where consistency was achievable, almost effortless. The first morning he laced up his running shoes. His legs felt heavy and his lungs protested. Yet he pushed through, completing the lap around his block. It was not a victory in the conventional sense. He had not run far or fast, but it was the first step toward building trust in himself, a promise kept no matter how small. The following day brought the same resistance, the familiar internal dialogue urging him to stay in bed, to delay, to avoid. But William remembered the principle he had discovered. Discomfort was not an emergency. He ran again, feeling each step as both a challenge and a lesson in endurance. Over the next weeks, the emails went out every single day, and the 400-meter runs became a ritual. A quiet but powerful affirmation that he could follow through even when he did not feel like it. The brilliance of this approach lay in its compounding effect. Each small action reinforced the habit. Each completed email or run became a vote for the person he was becoming. What had once seemed impossible or consistent, disciplined life slowly transformed into reality, not through heroic effort, but through persistent, almost invisible actions repeated daily. The consistency began to reshape William's mindset. He no longer saw these tiny tasks as trivial but as essential building blocks, laying the foundation for growth in every area of his life. What began as 5 emails and 400 meters evolved naturally, expanding as his confidence and capacity grew. Through this deliberate, microscopic approach, William learned that the size of the action mattered far less than the regularity with which it was performed. Each day's effort was a subtle but undeniable assertion of control over his own behavior, proving that he could be reliable to himself. As he continued, the rhythm of these small victories built momentum, eroding the inertia that had kept him stagnant for decades. The real transformation did not happen in grand leaps, but in the quiet accumulation of these seemingly insignificant choices, each reinforcing the other until they became a powerful, self-sustaining system that reshaped his life from the inside out. As the days turned into weeks, William began to notice the subtle yet profound changes that arose from his tiny, consistent efforts. The 5 emails he sent each morning, a task he had once dismissed as trivial, slowly accumulated into meaningful connections and opportunities. At first, the responses were non-existent, and doubt crept in, whispering that all this effort was wasted, that perhaps he was destined to fail once again. Yet he persisted, guided by the principle that results often lag behind effort, and that consistency, not intensity, was the engine of transformation. Each email, whether met with silence or rejection, reinforced his commitment and built a quiet confidence that had been absent for years. It was a compounding process. What seemed insignificant in the moment laid the groundwork for a network of trust and potential that only became visible over time. Similarly, his running routine, begun with just 400 meters a day, revealed the same pattern. Initially, his body resisted every step, lungs burning and legs aching with a heaviness that made the goal feel almost absurd. Yet each consecutive day of running, no matter how painful or inconvenient, strengthened not just his body but his sense of self-discipline. By the end of the first month, the 400 meters no longer felt like a battle, but a natural part of his morning rhythm. Encouraged by this incremental progress, he doubled the distance, then gradually increased it further. Within months, William was running kilometers he had never imagined possible, not because he had suddenly become superhuman, but because he had built a system in which regular effort outweighed sporadic intensity, proving that persistence mattered far more than the magnitude of any single effort. The transformation extended beyond the tangible metrics of business growth and physical endurance. Each day of follow-through reinforced a deeper truth. The person he was becoming could be relied upon, even when circumstances were difficult or motivation faltered. The structure of repeated small actions created momentum that made larger challenges approachable and reduced the psychological friction that had once paralyzed him. When one of his early clients cancelled unexpectedly, William did not crumble under disappointment. Instead, he returned to the same daily actions, confident that consistent effort would produce new opportunities. In his fitness journey, when illness or fatigue threatened to derail him, he adapted without abandoning the habit, adjusting intensity but maintaining frequency, demonstrating that progress is not about perfection but about persistence. Over time, the compounding effect of these modest yet deliberate actions became undeniable. The small, disciplined steps he had taken, sending emails, running, showing up for himself, accumulated into a thriving consulting business, a body capable of running long distances, and an internal sense of reliability that reshaped every aspect of his life. William's journey illustrated a principle often overlooked in a culture obsessed with instant results. Greatness is rarely born from isolated moments of intensity but from the quiet, steady accumulation of effort repeated day after day. Through this process, he learned that small actions, sustained consistently, wield far more transformative power than occasional bursts of ambition, and that the key to lasting success lies not in occasional heroics, but in the patient, disciplined rhythm of ordinary days lived extraordinarily well. Months into his new life of disciplined routines, William faced the true test of his transformation when an unexpected opportunity demanded he travel for 3 weeks to another state. The project promised good pay and professional growth, yet it threatened to disrupt everything he had meticulously built: his morning runs, his carefully structured workspace, and the simple yet powerful system that had anchored his business and personal progress. In the past, such a disruption would have been an excuse, a reason to abandon habits and surrender to old patterns of inconsistency and frustration. He remembered the countless times he had failed before, letting excuses, discomfort, or imperfect circumstances dictate his choices. And he knew that the only way to truly change was to act differently now. Arriving at the hotel, he quickly assessed his new environment. No familiar streets to run on, no kitchen table to set up his laptop, no routine that matched his carefully orchestrated apartment life. The first day was chaotic, with every habitual cue removed, every comfort replaced by uncertainty. For a moment, he felt the old panic rising, the familiar voice that told him to quit whispering urgently. But William drew on the principles he had embraced from Shitsuke and Gaman. He realized that discipline was not something dependent on the environment. It was something forged internally, through repeated action and unwavering commitment. If the system had been external, built solely on perfect conditions, it would have collapsed the moment circumstances changed. Instead, William adapted, translating his routines into whatever resources were available. The hotel treadmill replaced his block runs. The early morning hours became a time for focused emails in the hotel room, and small adjustments preserved the integrity of his daily actions. The first few days were uncomfortable, forcing him to confront every lingering doubt and discomfort he had previously avoided. Running on the treadmill in a dim hotel room, he fought against fatigue, boredom, and the yearning for the familiar. Each morning he completed his emails despite missing the tactile cues of his home setup, reinforcing the realization that the habit, the discipline, was no longer external but internal. By the end of the first week, the chaos began to feel less threatening. He discovered that flexibility was not the enemy of consistency, but its ally. The structure he had built was resilient because it was anchored in deliberate, repeated action rather than inconvenience or ideal conditions. As the second week unfolded, William's confidence grew. He had adapted the system successfully, demonstrating to himself that his discipline did not rely on perfect weather, familiar streets, or an orderly apartment. Every completed run and sent email was a reaffirmation that he could maintain his commitments regardless of circumstances. By the third week, the system flowed naturally. The actions were no longer rigid or forced, but had become an ingrained rhythm that transcended location or external conditions. This experience revealed a profound truth. While Shitsuke created external structures that made action easier, Gaman cultivated the internal resilience to continue even when the structures were imperfect or absent. Returning home, William realized that the external environment had ceased to control his behavior. He could now maintain his routines anywhere, under any conditions, and the discipline he had painstakingly built had been internalized. The lessons of adaptability, perseverance, and the power of small, consistent actions had crystallized into a form of self-trust and capability that no obstacle could undermine. William's journey through disruption showed that true discipline is not fragile or conditional. It is a deeply internalized force, cultivated over time, tested through imperfection, and proven resilient in the face of every challenge life presents. As William's disciplined routines became second nature, he began to notice changes that went far beyond tangible achievements like new clients or longer runs. Something deeper was unfolding, a quiet transformation of his identity and sense of self. Each day, as he opened his laptop and sent the 5 emails he had promised himself, or laced up his shoes to run a short distance he once deemed laughable, he was not merely completing tasks. He was casting votes for the person he wanted to become. Every small action reinforced a sense of reliability, a trust in his own ability to follow through, and each completed day became a testament to his integrity. The consistent practice of even the simplest habits built a bridge between intention and reality, between the person he had been and the one he was slowly becoming. Over time, William realized that discipline was no longer a matter of willpower or motivation. It had ceased to feel like an external burden and had become an intrinsic part of who he was. The act of showing up for himself every day, sending emails, running in rain or fatigue, adapting to unexpected circumstances, was shaping his identity, quietly but powerfully. This was the essence of Gaman, enduring discomfort without complaint, continuing despite resistance, and trusting that each small, deliberate act contributed to a larger transformation. Coupled with Shitsuke, the practice of designing environments and systems to make correct actions almost automatic, William discovered that identity could be built intentionally through repeated, consistent behavior. The impact of these small, disciplined acts extended beyond productivity. They restored a sense of dignity he had long neglected. In the past, broken commitments had eroded his self-respect, leaving him feeling untrustworthy even to himself. Each day he completed his micro-goals. He rebuilt a piece of that lost dignity, completing 5 emails, which seemed insignificant in isolation, became a symbolic victory over his old habits of avoidance and inconsistency. Running his 400 meters, incrementally increasing over weeks, was not merely a test of endurance but a reaffirmation that he could meet his own commitments. Through these repeated practices, William began to feel fundamentally different. He was a person who did what he said he would do, someone capable of keeping promises, even small ones, and in doing so, he rebuilt the most critical relationship in life, the one with himself. As months passed, William's identity solidified. He no longer needed to rely on motivation to act. The behavior had become ingrained. Skipping a day felt unnatural, almost like betraying himself, because the consistent actions were now woven into his sense of self. What had begun as awkward, tiny steps evolved into a profound internal transformation, where discipline was not an obligation but a reflection of his character. People around him began to notice the shift. He was reliable, trustworthy, and composed, not because he had changed circumstances, but because he had transformed the underlying self that engaged with the world. This deepened self-trust created a ripple effect, influencing his decisions, relationships, and opportunities, as others instinctively responded to his consistency and integrity. Ultimately, William's story demonstrated that regular, small practices do more than produce tangible results. They cultivate a resilient identity, a dignity rooted in self-trust, and a personal culture of discipline. What he had built was not just a routine, a business, or a physical ability. It was a self who could be relied upon, a version of himself forged through patient, consistent effort, where each minor act of commitment compounded into a life defined by integrity, perseverance, and the quiet but profound power of being someone who does what they say they will do. Years after William first started sending 5 emails a day and running his modest 400 meters, he found that the most rewarding part of his journey was no longer the business growth, the financial stability, or even the physical transformation. It was the opportunity to share what he had learned with others who were struggling in ways he once had. People who felt trapped by inconsistency, overwhelmed by goals that seemed too big, or defeated by repeated failures. William understood that the principles of Shitsuke and Gaman were not reserved for exceptional circumstances or extraordinary talent. They were tools accessible to anyone willing to start small and persist with relentless consistency. He began mentoring young people in his community, teenagers and young adults who had little direction or confidence in themselves. Unlike conventional motivational programs that relied on grand speeches or promises of instant success, William focused on practical, manageable actions. He challenged them to pick the smallest thing they could do consistently every day for 90 days. Some chose 10 push-ups, others 5 pages of reading, and a few decided to send a single email or complete one minor task toward a long-term goal. At first, the simplicity seemed almost insulting, and many doubted its effectiveness, mirroring the skepticism William himself had once felt. But the results, as weeks turned into months, were remarkable. Those who maintained the practice began to experience shifts not just in their skills or accomplishments, but in their identity and self-perception. They became people who could follow through, who could trust themselves, and who could handle challenges without giving up at the first sign of discomfort. William watched this unfold with a profound sense of satisfaction. He saw what he had learned internalized in others: the power of starting ridiculously small, the compounding effect of consistent action, and the strength developed through facing discomfort without surrendering. Every student who completed their 90 challenge emerged not only with a small achievement, but with a renewed sense of dignity and confidence in their ability to control their own lives. It was proof that transformation is replicable, that consistency is a skill that can be taught, and that the ripple effects of disciplined action extend far beyond personal success. As William reflected on his journey from the man who sat in his Detroit apartment with $847 in the bank and no direction, to the entrepreneur, athlete, and mentor he had become, he realized that the real lesson was not in the victories themselves, but in the process. Discipline is built one small, deliberate action at a time, and the sum of those actions shapes identity, earns trust, and creates results that outlast motivation or fleeting inspiration. Consistency becomes a lifestyle, a core part of who you are, and through that, it has the power to transform both personal circumstances and the lives of others. Thank you for staying with this story. If William's journey resonated with you, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more insights on discipline, personal growth, and practical strategies to transform your life. By subscribing, you join a community committed to action, learning, and the small steps that lead to extraordinary results. Keep going. Stay consistent. And remember that every small action you take is a vote for the person you are becoming.